we're going to be checking out You Will Be Angry, Werewolf, the Apocalypse Lore by TheBurgerkrieg. We got around to Pentex, the Triad, and the various basic, well, choose your own class of werewolves, which, admittedly, pretty cool. But this is a Burgerkrieg video. I remember what his Technocracy video did, and how he makes surprisingly good points that are salient and actionable. So I'm just going to sit here and remind myself there is no way that he will do this in a game about werewolves, because it's fantasy. It's not like there's a underlying assumption that this is a fight against corporations destroying the planet for greed and just the sheer blatant and evil actions. Can you imagine that? And they won't say anything. They'll be moderately terrifying or just make you want to sit there and go, oh God. Yeah, that definitely won't happen. Let me have this. Moving on before I think about it too much. I didn't subscribe yet. You saw nothing.
Garu opinions on, like, the personhood and even the existence of the triadic spirits are divided in a way they've never been before. Some really do just think of them as a metaphorical framework to make sense of the world. In fact, the whole worldview of the Garu, the triad and spirits and all that, is probably going to be sort of culturally translated and slotted into whatever framework any individual Garu can relate to.
Oh, that's...
and spirits and all that is probably going to be sort of culturally translated and slotted into whatever framework any individual Garu can relate to.
Okay, now that for me is absolutely fascinating. So it's not just that they know the truth because they are warriors of Gaia. It's they have a culture that interprets how they're doing everything. So you have so much leeway to play the exact same character in a different culture, but have completely different outcomes. Or, if they want to really screw around with you, competing werewolves who interpret what you're doing as evil. Oh, dude, sorry. I love it when there's a very straightforward faction, which on the surface is what the werewolves are. It's like, we are fighting for Gaia. But then when you get into it, it's like hyper-focused on their specific aspect based on their definitely classish thing, followed by all the interpretations and the apocalypse being everything evil. It just, there's so much deeper layers to what is straightforward the fighting grouping of all the werewolves are. Dude.
A very Catholic Garu Karen in an ancient Bavarian church might see the wild as the divine energy of creation, the weaver as the worldly efforts of man, and the worm as the evil works of the devil. They probably still refer to them by the terms wild weaver and worm when talking to other Garu of different cultures, but this is how they interpret it.
That is just perfect to me. So it gives you reason to let your characters change. It's not, okay, here is what you are. This is what the game says you are. This is all you're going to be. It's, here is the framework you're playing through. I love customization. This is so cool.
Until very recently, rather blasphemous idea that it is actually perhaps not the worm, but the weaver that is the enemy, as the worm's corruption is a consequence of its actions, has also been gaining traction. There are those...
Oddly enough, I've heard about that one. I miss a lot of what goes on in my Discord when it comes to World of Darkness because, oh dear God, there's a lot. It requires very specific information to understand the concepts being raised to the point where any actual information presented requires so many levels of study. And I don't mean reading, but study, that it almost becomes impossible to follow. But I remember early on, people explained that, yeah, everything's fucked up because of the worm, but the weaver might have fucked up the worm to make it this way. I don't know if that's true or not, and apparently that's something that's not just a conspiracy theory now. Ooh.
Who think of the worm as evil, and those who think of the worm as just following its essence and thereby doing bad things only from the perspective of Gaia, which relies on this sort of balance, but is being consumed whole by the worm. And to protect Gaia is, after all, what Garu are made to do. So Consequently, logically, the worm is the enemy. And they took their job so seriously that they protected the shit out of Gaia to the extent where, like, they would regularly go to war with other kinds of shapeshifters that were also created by Gaia for reasons other than to protect her. Because, I mean, if you're not protecting her, what are you doing, really?
Wait, what? See, I know there's multiple types of were factions, but is he actually talking about the division between specifically lycanthrope werewolves versus were-cats, were-badgers, were-dolphins? Because I do think I remember that is what happened. I'm pretty sure. I don't think Big D talked about that in anything. Huh.
Like, what is it that you are doing if you're not protecting? It's kind of suspicious. This is known as the War of Rage, both referring to a specific escalation of that conflict and frequent outbreaks of skirmishes and minor such wars throughout history and before history. Also, for an extended period of time during the dawn of civilization, werewolves reigned over humans in a way that some gangsters do, and frequently attempted to wipe them out entirely. This was
Well, that explains why this is happening in not Baltimore. I mean, Norfolk. Sorry, let me say it correctly. Norfolk. For the Brew Alpha Busa Wizard game. Can you imagine a place run by people who are just petty gangsters? Everyone living there probably can.
Known as the Impergium, and the pogroms and hunts left such a scar on the collective human psyche that we have an ancestral terror of werewolves known as Delirium.
Which I'm not going to comment on in case it's a spoiler.
Essentially, any non-supernatural human sees a Krenos-form werewolf and it's rapidly caught in the grips of terror. How exactly this manifests, whether like we freeze in place or we run away screaming or we punch the enormous fanged monster charging at us in the nozzle,
I mean, to be completely fair, I don't think I need supernatural delirium to be afraid of the giant wolf man with all the muscles and giant dripping claws and teeth, and I mean dripping, they're probably covered in blood. This one, yeah, dripping, and just I believe absolute utter panic is probably the smart move, and then delirium just doesn't help. If anything, the forgetting about it's more accurate. Yeah.
It depends on the person in question, and some are more affected by delirium than others. But it always includes some element of rationalization, be it in the moment or post hoc, of just like forgetting the entire situation or making up false memories that make the fact that werewolves exist not be floating around.
Which is, you know, crazy. Like, can you imagine if people made a choice, found out actions because of it, and then completely blanked out that their choice had any effect on these actions? I mean, people definitely don't actually create their own memories. You know, it might sound like I'm leaning into something here, but actually this is literally how our eyes work. Yeah. This is just one of those random bits of trivia I know for some reason, where the way the eye works isn't a full-on screen capture like we have in projection or cameras. It's actually points of vision that are very hyper-focused, that are covering enough of a globe that we can see it. And then our mind is actually essentially, I hate everything I'm about to say, using AI processing essentially to cover up what is missing in between those gaps. So a lot of what graphics cards are doing now is what our eyes and our brain already do. We see very clearly, down to a single photon of light, but not the entire field of vision. It's spotty. There's parts that aren't actually being seen if you hold still long enough. But your mind knows what's there from what was there, so it creates the vision in our memory that's then what we perceive. So we're not actually seeing the input, we're seeing the filtered input, which is also why we can't perceive a single photon of light, even if our eye can register it. Yeah, bodies are crazy when we really get into it. They did a test where if the nerves reacted to a single photon, it could perceive it. So when they got down to a single photon release, the nerves still reacted, even though the brain can't understand that input. It can be received. So the eye is more complicated than the brain. Yeah. Things like that are fascinating to me. So yeah, what he's describing is actually a biological function that exists that I'm absolutely certain the writers of, well, probably not even just werewolf lore, but anything to do with White Wolf probably weren't aware of, because I think a lot of this study is new-ish. Probably. I actually don't know when it came out. So yeah, it's just kind of fascinating to see what he's describing is completely, utterly made up and fantastical and just happens to align with something that our mind kind of does.
around our minds. Provided we survive, of course, which is, that's not usually the case.
Yeah.
Werewolves are instruments of violence, after all. Factories of rage, capital R rage. This is an in-game resource. Like blood is for vampires, rage is what werewolves use to protect Gaia from the ravages of greedy humans. It's what they fuel their powers with and what they use to transform into their monstrous forms. It's the defining emotion of their existence, and therein lies the problem, because as everyone who has ever tried to effectively protect anything may have noticed, anger issues are only useful in some very narrow aspects of that, and can be pretty detrimental in others.
So in other words, they've probably fucked up as much as they've protected. Oh.
Destroy logging equipment, sure, and you can even kill the blue-collar guys that are trying to make a buck to feed their families, but that's not actually going to stop the capital machine from buying new equipment. In fact, the construction of that equipment will require the extraction of resources elsewhere, and you sure as shit are not touching the boardroom executives who make those decisions.
Yep.
The machine regenerates faster than you can destroy it, so take your meaningless little victories, because unless you build something in the space you cleared, something permanent that will withstand the enormous pressure of that.
Is he leading into the werewolves actually making something? Because I always got the impression that they're more of the most anarchistic faction out there, and I'm including some of the vampire clans that are explicitly stated anarchy. Although functionally they're not actually anarchists. They function on saying they're anarchists, but look like they're essentially just totalitarian leadership structures. But is there a faction of vampires who actually create something to take the place of what they destroy? Not vampires, werewolves.
That machine, you are going to be fighting forever without actually ever getting anything done. And building, abolishing, putting in place alternative systems, maintaining those systems, it's not something werewolves are suited to doing.
Because they have a very rigid structure of classing based on when they first change that decides their personality and what they do and how they look into things, even when it conflicts. Oh. Also, people are mentioning glasswalkers. I have no idea what that is yet. Also, I just need to pull this up right now. Michael Hampton, 1, thank you, 2. Sesame Street came out in 1969. It's in its 55th season. It's older than One Piece. Yeah, not related. I'm looking at this and I have no idea how to really respond to that, because it's just kind of one of those, that can't be, but then you think about it, it's like, no, it is right. Oh God. Still not sure what a glasswalker is. Maybe it'll come up.
Rage and claws will not help you maintain a housing co-op or an organic farm. A little ferocity may help you if you are elected to sit at the helm of a credit union, but most of that work is pushing numbers and managing people you want to be loyal to you.
There's nothing I could say right now that won't be depressing. I'm just going to say, I am so glad he believes that people in charge of credit unions are not rage monsters who want people to be loyal to them. Something, look at Madman, something.
Not terrified. It's work so devoid of fury that you will run the risk of losing the wolf inside of you entirely, which is something that can and will happen.
What?
And when it does, you need to work hard to win it back.
What?
And risk of losing the wolf. That work is pushing numbers and managing people you want to be loyal to you, not terrified. It's work so devoid of fury that you will run the risk of losing the wolf inside of you entirely.
Okay, see, 1, I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that you can lose the werewolf by being appropriately mentally healthy. Also, I'm now convinced that this man has never actually dealt with numbers. Or he is so absurdly good at them, the sheer thought of what he just said doesn't cause rage. Because if I had to work at a credit union to manage it and deal with numbers and people dealing with that kind of shit, oh no, I would never have a problem keeping the rage for a werewolf. If anything, it would be overcharged. There's a reason you don't fuck with accountants. Yeah, it's like, that's the boring little one who's like nerdy and all into it. It's like, no, these are giant piles of do not. They have a shotgun. It does have all the names of their previous victims on it, and bullets are coming custom signed. Every single one gets a name on it. These are the people you run away from. You know how they usually say it's the quiet ones? No, it's just the accountants. It's people who have accounting personalities. You should be afraid. I'm not just saying this because the concept of willingly working with numbers as the explicit purpose of the job causes me existential fear. But if I was, I wouldn't admit to it.
Entirely, which is something that can and will happen. And when it does, you need to work hard to win it back, if you even want to at all. Werewolves are passionate creatures of emotional extremes, which can also be dangerous because they can get almost metaphysically locked into one of them. And then it's almost impossible to pull them out again. But even there's a spectrum, so you don't always know.
So you can get locked into an MMO. So the easy one's probably rage, but I wonder if someone just gets locked into being happy or locked into being, well, there's a whole range of emotions that I'm sure someone could get locked into. Oh, and Shadys, hello, trained accountant here. I'd like to point out, he did not say I'm wrong. And Sergeant, you write software for accountants? Is that better? Yes. Although I know enough people who are programmers to realize the standard writing any program or software is something along the lines of, hey, I've worked it. It's working. It's working. It stopped working. Why is it not working? Followed by 10 minutes of shouting every profanity you can in multiple different languages before it actually works, or does it, and you have no idea why either outcome happened. I thought that was a joke, and then I met a few programmers who did it in front of me, and it was terrifying.
Whether someone is experiencing one of these extreme emotional states. The emotion becomes part of them. It's something that, an emotion that you usually also have, it's just driven up to an extreme. It seeps into their personality more than usual, but because they are, and people do change over time, you don't always see it before it's too late.
Oh dear God, considering when this came out. This came out, I think, in the 80s, late 90s, or early 90s. Which means there's a very good chance the concept of being emotionally locked because of heightened states is literally looking at Vulcans and going, hey, what if we took out the intentionally regulating themselves aspect? So werewolf cultures are essentially just Romulans, but without the government. It would be in the general lexicon at the time. It would be well known and probably an easy idea to play off of. I wouldn't be surprised if that was an inspiration for that entire style of thought process.
There are two of these states, harano and glos. Harano is a state of deep disillusionment and depression. It's the loss of the will to fight, the inability to channel rage to wage war on behalf of Gaia. And I mean, how could you not get depressed, right? Like when you realize how invincible the opponent is, how unwinnable the war, how unsuited you and your fellow Garu actually are at defeating the corruption and environmental pollution that is killing, nay, has killed Gaia. The problem with harano is that people who suffer from it will often advocate temperance and restraint, which in many situations is actually going to be entirely prudent and a good idea.
What?
Something especially elder werewolves are expected to do in order to temper the destructive passions of their younger kin. And it's
so I need to hear that again. That sounds fascinating.
Entirely prudent and a Gaia. The problem with harano is that people who sing Garu actually are at defeating the corrupt. How unsuited you? How could you not rage to wage war on behalf of Gaia?
Yeah.
And I mean, how could you not get depressed? War? How environmental pollution is that people who suffer from it will often advocate temperance and restraint, which in many situations is actually going to be entirely prudent and a good idea.
So in other words, I love and hate this. I love it because as far as the way to show what happens is going, an elder werewolf is probably super badass, super strong, super powerful, super knowledgeable. and also the one who is never going to do anything that would interfere with a game because they're preaching restraint, so they become an obstacle. You being like, yeah, let's kill things, would not be wanting to do because it's temperance and restraint and depression locked in. Sorry, just from a design standpoint, this is perfect because it gives the answer of, okay, why is no one saying anything to do about this? That's more knowledgeable. Why aren't the super powerful ones doing anything? Because they're literally locked into, this isn't going to work. Let's not be horrible about it. Because they've learned not to, but also because they're essentially suffering from magic depression, it sounds like. But also functions in such a same way that it doesn't interfere with the game, but also builds up the world in a way that isn't a plot hole. Kind of like how D&D has a plot hole of, hey, if you're just a bunch of random killers running around doing everything and, fighting everything without regard for what's happening, how come no one does anything about it? In D&D, it's because, well, we're just not dealing with it right now. The setting doesn't really change. You have your basic thing and you move off. Here, it's because the people who could do something about it are depressed. And one of the things that happens in depression is not reacting. So slower, more lethargic, not always moving as much. It's like, yeah, if they got off their ass, they'd probably stop you in a heartbeat, but they won't. So the level 20 adventurer who is going to run the bar might actually let you just be an asshole because they don't have the energy. We're just not dealing with this shit today. Huh. I'm not sure if that's how we played out, but it is a functional way to use it. And I kind of love that. Also, Crunk Maniac, why is it working is often scarier than why is it not working? Because if something started working when it shouldn't, you don't know when it will break. Those are worse to live by. And Michael Hamilton mentioned Dungeons and Dragons first came out in 1974, and the 2025 Monster Manual has a new monster that is a gargantuan divine mech called a Colossus. Michael Hamilton, I'm going to say something I never thought. You have convinced me that I need to go buy the 2025 update of that. Nothing so far has made me really care. And now I have a reason to care because that sounds amazing. Oh, that's actually so cool. And Jesse, why does the video glitch like that? I'm not sure. It might be a connection issue. It's probably a connection issue. For me or for you, I don't know, but it's probably one of us.
Something especially elder werewolves are expected to do in order to temper the destructive passions of their younger kin. And it's a very bad idea to accuse an elder of having fallen to harano at the moot just because they said you shouldn't go to the bar and
but they're probably all thinking about it.
Celebrating a big birthday there. Unless you are looking to get torn to shreds, that is. The inverse is how Glosk, the state...
It is fascinating, though, because if harano functions the same way as all the smart people telling you not to do the stupid, it also means you're going to instinctively not listen to the smart people because you think they're literally just sick and depressed. Sorry, when the entire faction is based around the smart people automatically being discounted because they also could be sick people and, not thinking correctly, meaning that, well, me being an idiot who wants to go and bash someone's head in is obviously the right choice. Is an actual thought process that makes sense in universe. That you can find out you're wrong because they would then tear you apart if you said it to their face, which is just, yeah, I love this.
Of infinite rage, the endless battle frenzy in which you are nonetheless sharp and of human mind. As opposed to like a regular frenzy where your inner monster takes over and which is also limited in time, which our Glosk isn't. It's the Garu blunt instrument mentality driven not to 11 but to 12, and you become an active danger even to your fellow Garu. Because every second you spend not slaughtering and destroying is a second wasted. And those who waste time in the fight against the worm are basically servants of the worm that ought to be slaughtered themselves.
Which is probably what led to the rage stuff, because this is all rage, and if they had a war of rage, which caused them to slaughter other wereforms or shapeshifters. Yeah, I could see how this is probably the one that is the most destructive to them, because they fucked over everyone else who could have helped them and now won't, because they killed them. Funny how that works out. Ooh. And Zibrix, you mentioned in a team werewolves in all RPGs, if I can, I'm tuning it into one. SAP like in Skyrim. Oh god. Yeah, I mean, it usually comes with a lot of benefits.
It's hard to detect Hal-Glosk as well sometimes, because many Garu thinks it's a sign of weakness to not believe you can just Johnny Silverhand against the machine until the machine is broken. You'll become a target
And just like Johnny Silverhand, it won't work.
of ridicule, and often
Okay,
even
that's
like
all that setting.
accusations of being a corruption sympathizer or some other weird
Wait,
made-up
what?
in the moment political epithet. So it's pretty
Oh, I guess, yeah, if you're literally fighting against the destruction of everything that's already succeeded because Earth is dead, maybe, depending on who you talk to. I've seen lore that says both. Then, yeah, that it would take just it's not even just a political slur at that point. It's like, oh, you sympathize with corruption. It's literally, we have slaughtered entire species for what I am accusing you of. Takes the threat a lot higher, actually. Huh. Also, Michael Abity mentioned the concept for the Colossus is that it was made and animated by a god or their worshippers and is sapient. The arc reactor thing in the chest is the seat of its power. It can be turned into a cockpit. So let me get this straight. This isn't just a mech. They made a Megazord. Or a Gundam. Take your pick. Oh my god. We literally have Gundam in D&D. That is so incredibly stupid. I'm hoping it's on Eberron. Because that kind of fits with their entire aesthetic. If it's in regular D&D, maybe not so much. But if it's in Eberron, that is perfect, man. And Kronk, you mentioned idea of artificers. What? Cloth repeater 600 repeating musket with fire rate 30 to 60 shots per minute. Part standardized killed in commercially. Oh, part standardization. Actually, those kind of weapons already exist in D&D. 5th edition started with it at the back of the rulebook. They're part of the game already. Yeah. So are, well, some sci-fi guns that do actually exist. I only know because I was allowed to use them when I found it in the rulebook. It's like, hey, there's a particle accelerator rifle at the back here. It does like 6d10 damage on a hit. As part of the standard Dungeon Master's Guide. Yeah. That's a thing.
normal for werewolves to really play
Glasswalkers
their
are
way
mech
to
wolves.
avoid such accusations
Oh.
or gain political support among hardliners who desperately want to think the world is simple. There's a whole tribal
And that does confirm what I'm thinking. So hardliners think the world is simple. And it probably plays into a lot of player characters who were like, okay, we're going to play the fighting faction. Let's go bash some skulls in. And I guess a lot of the problems would probably be, okay, hardliners are right because they get to fight things. Yeah, it makes sense.
werewolf that's in a permanent state of Hal-Glosk, essentially, and we'll talk about them later. It should be noted that Hal-Glosk is actually new in 5th edition. Harano has been around for a while, but part of the W5 design philosophy has been to capture the nuance that just blind rage and anger is actually not just good, and can
Oh. See, this is actually fascinating because I've heard a lot of the discussion about the various editions of Werewolf, and a lot of them are Old World was good, but complicated. Chronicles was a good system, but had no lore. And then there's the 5th edition that came out, and it was divisive. Some people hate it. I've seen some people say, oh, it's fine. And I'm just generally treating it as, I'm just going to play whatever the fuck sounds fun anyways. Who cares? I mean, I treat all RPGs with the entire premise of, that's a cool rule. I'm going to use that. That one isn't. If everyone else is okay with ignoring it, we're going to ignore it. It's why I've played games where we've done 5th edition D&D with advanced D&D, first edition setting options. If that sounds broken, I mean, against any other DM, it wouldn't be, but this is a DM who thinks a level 20 doubled up sorcerer and a level 20 wizard, legendary dragon with invisibility at will constantly, even through attacks, is a good warm-up boss who's also fighting with a simulacrum and a clone. Yeah. You can do a lot when you're just like, okay, let's use what rules are fun.
can be extremely ineffective and even hinder the goals you are trying to achieve. Some people are unhappy with
This
that.
sounds
I
good for
don't
5th
actually
edition,
hate
though.
it. I just think it ought to be possible to regulate both of these states more finely and bring Garu back from them, like, explicitly. The way they're described sometimes makes them seem like end states, while I think they're much more interesting as plot hooks.
Okay, so I get where he's going. So what they're describing as, if you become too much of one, you're locked in and there's no coming back. Where he likes, when you're here, you're locked in until you fix it. Or if you can. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, personally, I would play it that way, but I mean, a permanent locked in state sounds more like a personal choice. And if it's not played that way, I honestly would ignore it and do it anyways. Personal opinion. Michael, you mentioned Spelljammer already had a mech that looked like the Spirit Warrior can link a server of the 2025 manual. Oh, made it divine and gargantuan. Honestly, Spelljammer has some cool things. It just sucks that they dropped the ball on that release so heavily.
Illustrate the pitfalls of the thoughtlessness and flat-out arrogance with which Garu operate when they don't take the time to put in legwork. It's actually a very common belief among Garu that young vampires look like humans and old vampires look weird and deformed. If you know anything about vampires, you know that this is very much not true. But as a werewolf, you might gain the impression that vampires are not actually particularly dangerous when you handle an elder vampire, which was in fact like a fledgling Nosferatu that didn't even have double digits of eternal life under its belt. This was
Oh, I thought I was mishearing that, but no. That's... So there's a very good chance werewolves are blind to the situation. Maybe not all of them, because they are not going to want to interact normally with human society, except for maybe the rogues, who are like the tricksy ones. So there's a good chance, especially the ones who are all rage, rage against the machine, we're also losing, we'll ignore that part. They might not actually know what the other dangers are because they're actively not looking. Not just not looking, but making a point not to look, and then they're wrong because they've taken the simple option. Oh, that's fascinating. It's kind of like how hunters in Hunter the Reckoning, Hunter the Awakening, Hunter the Parenting, are intentionally the faction with the least information and who actively lie to each other, because when you have the right information, things that don't like you finding out actively kill you. They have to play with wrong information and intentionally wrong information, which are two different things. You have to figure out which it is. Then you have this situation where the werewolves might overestimate themselves against an ancient vampire of, oh god, what the fuck proportions. Even though they can handle most vampires, the ones they can't, they won't realize they can't until it's too late. That is... Sorry, I love it when you have that inbuilt hubris that is perfectly justified until it isn't. That is so cool.
Mistake would cost you dearly when you realize the evil club owner, who is a vampire, looks like a regular person, and so you conclude she's easily dealt with. It's just that this 1,000-year-old Toreador already smelled you and your gang when you crawled out of the can this morning and could give you all an aneurysm by flashing some titty. And this is why, despite their overwhelming zeal...
They did what with the what? I don't know what Toreador is, so maybe that's the case.
Werewolves didn't actually manage to protect Gaia. They failed.
Yeah.
The game is called Werewolf the Apocalypse, but it really should be called Werewolf the Post-Apocalypse, because Gaia is dead. Or if not, she is a difficult thing with spirits. She's certainly on her last few breaths.
Oh, so it actually is a flat-out spirit, not just the physical world itself. Also, he's equivocating there on, is it dead or dying? Or is it just reduced? And that's, honestly, I don't know. This one could be any number of ways. It sounds like intentionally set as dead, then changed to, well, it's also changed so maybe they're not dead, but reduced to the point of being dead as the spirit it was. Is this one of those things where it's been changing as the games progress so it's less depressing? It seems like a lot of the times you want to do that in games because it changes the narrative. This is only because I've noticed this in multiple game designs. Sometimes things are slowly progressing, become brighter or darker, but they always change over time because it lets you tell more of a story than you previously did. But I haven't been aware of this, well, beyond this year, really, the last 12 months, how much of White Wolf lore there is. So has that been changing where it started horrible and then became possible to not be horribly dead? Or has it always been that way? Or is it getting darker where it was, well, it probably is dead too. No. She dead. We fucked. I don't know. I kind of want to find out some more information from other people. There's so much going on. Also, Kronk, you mentioned the false Hydra. You drop a healing item as they need, and when they get better, you had a forgotten healer. Oh, that's horrible if you want to fuck around with people, man. I would do that.
Some still hold on to hope, but there's nothing that can be done to save her. Other shapeshifters may be good at some of that, but werewolves have killed so many of those that they're politically alienated from them and their causes. Nobody trusts werewolves, not even werewolves themselves.
What?
The political divisions run really fucking deep among the tribes. It really is like the experience of being a leftist sometimes. I mean, it's uncanny. There used to be something called the Garu Nation. There isn't such a thing anymore.
So this is something people mentioned last time I checked out this video from Burgerkrieg. I heard there was, and then as the editions progressed, they took it out. Not because it was a retcon, but because explicitly by this time period, it was explicitly in canon destroyed. Which is also cool, but I'm kind of curious about this because I don't know a lot about this, and it sounds like they did actually create a structure. Huh.
Its purpose was to organize the vastly differing tribes and philosophies and unite them against the apocalypse.
Ah! Yeah, that would explain why it's destroyed. If the apocalypse happened and it's technically post-apocalyptic and no one else has figured it out yet. Yeah. I wonder if a mage could just undo that. Or if a mage is the one that killed it. Considering the concept of sleepers, that probably is literally what happened.
But the apocalypse has happened. Like, it's a done deal. It's a lost battle. Or so most Garu believe. This has destroyed the political cohesion of the Garu nation.
Which is why they turn on
that many
themselves.
players don't really like, though I personally think it just makes sense politically. But if you like the concept of the Garu nation, I'm sure there's a lot of people in places who don't agree that it's no longer a thing, and where it may very well still be a significant power.
Oh. So it could also be played off as, well, it's destroyed here, but over here we still have power because we split it off, or just your own setting. I guess that makes sense. If we'd done the stuff in the technocracy where there was the cataclysm blocking off access to extra dimensional worlds, bubbles of reality and whatnot, I guess you could play it as whatever you want here too.
A lot of players are a bit more pissed off about is how they changed the tribes, and they did change the tribes quite a bit. I don't really think it's a great idea how they did it. I don't think it was motivated by a desire to tell the best possible story why they did it. But I also think there's a lot of potential here to make this the best and most nuanced interpretation of tribes ever.
See, here's the thing. I don't know anything about werewolf tribes at all. I have no information about this. But I know that any decision that's not made for a story reason is always going to come with a possible side of, and then they fucked up. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Magic the Gathering. If I just did physical damage to someone, I don't mean psychic, I mean physical damage for mentioning that. If I have to suffer with it, so do you.
Only we don't entirely discard the old law, and we actually take the new law changes seriously, because some of them are quite good. There are 11 different tribes of Garu in Werewolf 5th edition.
What were they before?
14 if you count the ones that are not available to player characters. And what you may have heard is that the tribes are different now than they were in the old law, obviously. They don't even have the same names, and they don't have the same past. I get why one would be irritated by this. I don't think it's the worst change in the world, and I'll explain why. But first, we have to talk about what a tribe even is, because it's not so much a family or some like genetically related grouping of Garu. It's first and foremost a political organization with a strong spiritual component.
So this is literally like joining Catholicism or joining the Green Party, except it's the same thing. Huh.
They are essentially nations without territory, if you will, political parties. It's normal and in fact common for pacts to contain members of different tribes, and for clans, which are werewolf gathering places of significant spiritual power, to be maintained and protected by local members of different tribes working together. Though their goals may not always be perfectly aligned, their differences make it so they have more to gain from working together than going against each other. A young Garu chooses their tribe and the tribe chooses them, and it does happen that Garu may change tribes if their views or the views of that tribe become irreconcilable. It's not something that happens very often, though. Each tribe...
But it has happened. Oh. And that probably leads into the tribes you can't play as, because they're probably either destroyed or enemy factions explicitly.
Tribe has a totem as its patron spirit, which aligns with its philosophy and gives the tribe a magical gift, but also forbids the tribe from certain actions, though transgressing against this doesn't mean you get immediately kicked or something.
So they're going with paladin rules. Do not sin! I have defined sin by this distinct method. Also, if you do it, the DM will hand wave it away because we don't want to change it up.
Tribe used to also have a cultural affectation.
Oh?
Well, most of them did, at least. And in Werewolf 5, they got rid of this. And it has a lot of people very up in arms that the Black Furies are no longer defined by their Greek mythology aesthetic, among other things.
Yeah, that would make sense. When you lose the visual aspect of something, speaking as a nerd who's into miniatures, again, I like miniatures. I sell miniatures. I like them. And when you take out the aspect of this is what the iconography, what the symbolism, what the physical description looks like, and disconnect that from the lore, I can understand why you'd be upset. From a physical standpoint. Although I have an idea, I know where he's going with this one, where disconnecting the culture from the group is probably a good idea in the long term, because this is less hard coding as you can only be this thing, because the entire concept he's been explaining is here is the way of thinking, and that's how you join the tribe. You've joined the group. You don't have to be part of the group already, which is what an aesthetic would really lead into, because if you're not part of this group, you can't become it, as opposed to what they're talking about as, which is join this group. You don't have to be a part of it already. It's the concept of being able to move between, which is kind of what it sounds like they were aiming for, but then failing because they hard-coded it a certain way. It would be really cool, though, if they explicitly broke it and did someone from one culture who was explicitly, essentially cosplaying the tribe they wanted to be in. But that leads to a lot of real-world problems that would definitely be a bitch to handle.
I know why they did this, and it's the same reason why they got rid of certain tribes altogether. They did not want ostensibly cosmopolitan political forces to bear a certain aesthetic that is evocative of a particular time and place, right? Because if that aesthetic is something European, it's Eurocentric. If it's not, it's always some sort of fetishization of indigenous cultures. You can't really win when you do this. Somebody online is going to start a shitstorm no matter what you do.
And this is why I'm not on Twitter or Reddit. Yeah.
And so what Paradox did, and what many of these companies do, is they hire sensitivity consultants and the like. And what they ask those consultants is, hey, how do I represent this indigenous culture accurately in a way that no one will complain about, guaranteed? And
the answer is don't. That's also because you hire a consultant who's going to look at how other people react, not the culture themselves. Honestly, the way they've represented Native American culture so far is kind of been some of the best descriptions I've seen, but I'm also not Native American. My ideas count for nothing on that.
And the answer always, inevitably, is, well,
don't.
Every culture and every cultural concept is inherently diverse in how the people of that culture relate to it and interpret it. And no matter what you do, someone from that culture, or someone speaking on that culture's behalf, is going to get mad. Because, maybe it's not their particular view of that element you are putting into fiction, and their view is just as valid as your interpretation, but you don't want them to get mad in the first.
This is also why a lot of people have gone into the silo approach of everyone will get mad. Make sure that the people who are mad are not the people paying you. It's a dick way to look at it, but it's completely accurate. Also, Hobby, you mentioned Warhammer The Awakening Intermissio. Well worth the 7 minutes of your time. Oh, it came out from Gabriel? Ooh. I'm almost hoping that wins it. The thing is, I think I've actually missed quite a few things he's done. So if I checked out his work, it would be a lot more than just that one video.
Place. You can't really be authentic and accurate at the same time. These two things are mutually exclusive. At least this is what they'll say if they're not fucking hacks. And unfortunately, the consulting industry is pretty much defined by hacks in every field. And then the publishing corporation goes, all right, we're getting rid of any references to real world culture completely, and we're not working with anyone's cultural trappings in a creative, like, interesting or authentic way by actually doing the work of learning about it. Because that's expensive, and we have deadlines, and someone will still get mad when we do it, so...
See, here's the thing that I know he's wrong about. He assumes that publishing companies actually would publish in the first place. He's right about not having the money. It's worse. In general, if they know for a fact they don't need to market this, they will market it because they get a return on investment. If it needs marketing to succeed, no. Do it yourself. Yeah. Again, it's one of the reasons maybe I don't like Twilight, but I fully recognize Stephanie Meyers as marketing goes. Nailed the assignment. She did a perfect job of getting attention on her series as it was being made and holding that attention and doing just good enough that it worked. Don't really care for the story she told. Not really interesting to me. But damn, does she do the exact thing she needs to do to survive as a writer at this point, which a lot have a hard time with and it scares the shit out of me because it involves talking to people.
Oh, what's the point? But then they tend to keep a lot of the European-based stuff because it doesn't really matter when this sort of cultural distortion gets complained about by white people. So you'll get shit like them renaming the Sumeri bloodline in Vampire into the Nation of Blood because they don't want real-world religious figures in their game, where vampires are literally called Cainites and are canonically cursed by the Christian God. They're kind of being the weaver, but being so afraid of the worm that they end up trapping the wild. Some of the tribes like...
Which honestly, in its own right, is kind of fascinating if you played into that as a system, but I don't think anyone would because... Ugh.
Like the Wendigo was so inextricably linked with their cultural aesthetic that they would not work in a framework like this at all. And let's be serious, they were originally in there to sort of fill the niche of ethnic werewolves, so they were struck from the canon basically completely.
So in other words, they were added in as, well, we should probably put something in for other cultures, and then they slap-assed it. I know what I said. So, and they took him out for the same reason they put him in. Sure, fuck it, put it in. Followed by, sure, fuck it, take him out. Yeah, that's disappointing, but not unheard. Also, Old Man reacts, hurls a brick through the window, says, I am the old and the reckless, the old and the beautiful. I am horrible soap opera. And then he leaves. 1, hi, old man. 2, I also heard you're going to the convention later. 3, sup. Also, goodbye.
I don't think that this is necessarily the right approach to doing this sort of thing, especially given that one of the key political conflicts in Garu culture, across the United States at least, was that all these European colonizer tribes with their ideology-defined allegiance came over and tried to impose their order on the indigenous werewolves called the Pure Tribes, whose philosophy very much was being inherently tied to the land and the people. There were
That's fascinating. And they took that out. That actually annoys me because a concept being tied to the land, being tied to the people, means that as long as the land is surviving, as long as the people are surviving, their definition of maybe it's not the apocalypse. And that's also probably why he mentioned that it's either the guy is destroyed or guy is diminished as a division there. Because you can already see it right there. Different werewolves, different cultures. Every step of the way he's been talking about this. And I'm freaking out over it because I love this kind of detail active aspect. And it sounds like they removed it because, too much work. Damn. Also, Old Man reacts. You're going to be trying. I'm not leaving. I took the day off because I feel like crap today. Honestly, no, good choice, man. If you feel like crap, if you got the time off, use it. It's always better. And Jesse, so Valerian, people can turn into werewolves if they get a bit scratched by the beast or it doesn't work. Actually, Jesse, from what I understand, you're born as a werewolf, but there's ways to become them. But they're also really fucked up and limited and also kind of horrible.
All tracts about the arrogance of the white werewolf lineages who had alienated themselves from the world they lived in and the humans they coexisted with, telling the pure ones how to fight the battle against Gaia and bringing in their weird genocidal tendencies. But they got rid.
Yeah, because most werewolves did that. Although I guess it makes sense why they do that, because they were probably trying to say they were organized prior to Gaia to being destroyed. Again, it's probably one of those, they was brought in slapdash, maybe not handled well, and taken out slapdash and not handled well. I'm seeing a pattern forming. Also, Kronk, talk about cultural appropriation. I'm Polish. Our culture has so many Orientalisms. There's always someone angry that we don't care anymore. I mean, dude, I'm American. Our entire culture is, let's steal that. Which is also something we stole from the Romans. Granted, if you know anything about Roman culture, it's also what the British stole from them. Theft. Does that make cultural appropriation our cultural heritage? So if we're not doing this, does that mean we're doing it wrong? You know, this entire line of thought is madness. I'm going to drop it right here.
Rid of all that because we don't want to be accused of otherizing by pointing out the fact that there are others. There are, in fact, people who are different from you. And that's fine. It's fine that they are there. But actually, let's not mention that. I think that.
So are they there but not mentioned, or are they there and written out because they tried to do the entire line of we were all together until we weren't? Because Gaia died, but then if there's others who never agreed with it, maybe Gaia isn't dead? I guess it really comes down to, was every werewolf united in the Garu nation, or were only some of them and it was always a fraction? Huh.
This general trend just encourages the omission of non-white cultural representation for cynical PR reasons, thereby ultimately achieving the exact opposite of what the good cultural consultants are trying to do, and also a very real practice of otherization and mystification of foreign cultures instead of actually trying to engage with them in a meaningful way. Oh no!
Yeah. Ah, yes, you have become the thing you feared. Because doing it right takes effort, and no one does that. But also because effort rarely actually adds more money to it.
Oh, don't be in touch with a different thing. You'll do it wrong, and you'll hurt them somehow. It's such a different way of breeding reactionary fear toward foreign cultures. It's just wearing a mantle of inclusivity. It creates a sort of cultural hierarchy in which the modern European-derived culture must patronizingly protect the purer indigenous cultures from the exploitation that it itself does, to preserve a vague vibe of authenticity by ultimately concealing the humanity of those cultures. Because when you portray an indigenous culture doing something evil, that's bad. And when you portray them doing something good, that's fetishizing. When in fact it...
Honestly, I still prefer this to what he talked about in the Technocracy. The Technocracy one where it was like an active breakdown on the banality of evil and corruption as a state of existence in the most mundane and non-magical way possible was just depressing. This though was kind of fascinating, where all of Werewolf seems to be activism for environmentalism as the initial starting point, the game. But then that's changed into, well, let's add things to get more culture, but it wasn't done well, so they kind of took it out because it wasn't done well, and they didn't have the time and the money to really fix it. But then they're becoming like this, and then this entire discussion about cultures as, are we appropriate, are we not appropriate, are we looking at it badly, are we not looking at it badly? Thing is, though, what he's describing as what they're afraid to do, and then why they're doing it anyways because they're trying to avoid it, is also a thing that happens. For example, there was the standard practice of a long time in Hollywood. They would just have an actress who looked slightly ethnic. Now, notice I'm not actually saying which ethnicity here, because that would always be the islander, the African, the American, who is not a immigrant, but a Native American, the South American, The Finnish person is probably the one they wouldn't do, but someone who is Asian. It would always be the same actress. They actually had specific actresses who spoke with a slight accent. Doesn't matter what kind, but they would keep them on because that was the job, to be the non-generically white, usually with an accent that sounded like it's Eastern, sometimes Northern, sometimes Southern. Never a Mexican accent or a Spanish accent or a Southern California accent or whatever the hell Minnesota has. I refuse to acknowledge that's an accent. I honestly believe it's an affect. But it was that specific, not standard thing. And they would just put it anywhere. And it was always the wrong accent, including when they actually hired someone who's Puerto Rican to play a Puerto Rican and then had her intentionally use her wrong accent even when she had an actual Puerto Rican accent. Honestly, the only reason I'm specifically not mentioning the actress's name is because for some reason I cannot remember it. She was in West Side Story as one of the main actresses. I remember that much. I don't even remember her name, though, and it's actually bugging me. But that was an entire thing in Hollywood for the entire culture of it was, fuck it, we don't care. But now we've gone to the other side of, fuck it, we don't care to deal with it, so we're not going to touch it at all. You see the connecting line there. It's the fuck it, we don't care. Who would have thought that if you don't care, you do stuff stupid? That's crazy. That's crazy.
It should be neither, because every culture has a right to be as nuanced and grey as every other, and every human being has the same moral agency as any other. This is not something we can deny certain cultures just to hoard all the guilt for ourselves. You may have noticed that I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the white bourgeois intelligentsia instrumentalizing indigenous cultures for their own spiritual atonement over shit they had no hand in, just to make themselves look good in their own circles and think of themselves as morally superior because they engaged in self-flagellation over guilt porn. But then,
I mean, we could just call it what it is, Twitter. I mean, the same is also true on the reflected side, whereas the people who are anti that also do it, it's literally just take your side. It's the exact same thing, but with different trappings. It's just self-aggrandizement through suffering versus self-aggrandizement through anger. It's really no different. It's just self-aggrandizement every side, every way, every person.
I also don't subscribe to the idea that it's racist not to believe in witchcraft. So what do I know, really? We're getting markedly off topic. This was not...
Wait, people consider not believing in witchcraft racist? I know Wicca's a religion, but how would that be racist? It's not like Judaism where there's a genetic component on top of the religious component. Genetically, it was considered passed down through the maternal lineage, but also something you could then become through conversion, but that's completely unrelated to this. Unless Wicca did have that? Or is it a different form of witchcraft I'm not aware of? It could be for all I know. I don't know nearly enough about that side.
Supposed to be a political video, but it's a game about politics. Aside
Yeah.
from all that, I still think this new way of doing tribes, without most of them being tied to some sort of cultural aesthetic, has a lot of redeeming qualities.
Like?
If it didn't come with the baggage that it does, I might even prefer it, because it doesn't make too much immediate sense to have some Tatar of the steppes living in a yurt, having a dream catcher, right? Because, you know, that's just the aesthetic of their tribe, so they have to have one. But at the same time, I see a great opportunity here, because culture has been syncretized forever. That's how culture happens, and has always happened. And the channels through which this happens are essentially infinite. A political organization will have certain...
For everyone wondering, the word syncretize is basically matching up other places where it didn't before. An easy way to look at this is, okay, the Greek gods, you are now Roman. That's synchronizing. Syncretizing, but same word, honestly. It's a completely different word, but honestly, the meaning is completely accurate either way.
Cultural practices and symbols to represent itself. And if that organization formed at a particular time and place, or was defined by a particular time and place, it makes sense that certain symbols would be removed from their original cultural context and transplanted into different cultural context through time and space, especially if it's not managed by a corporate PR team. If your political organization is big and widespread enough, and I think for Garu tribes this very much applies, they probably will have different regional factions and subgroups that use some symbols and not others. And maybe none at all, and they have a strong aesthetic of their own because they have a particular relation to their land and culture that represents the philosophy of that tribe very well. I think especially in the United States you'd expect more syncretism than anywhere else in the world, but I still...
Honestly, Rome and probably London would also have high synchronicity for the same reason I mentioned earlier of cultural appropriation being the culture. I mean, in Rome, it was literal. They just stole shit. And then in London, I mean, there's a lot of jokes about the British Museum that are completely accurate. So, yeah, there probably would be a lot. Although I think Rome maybe even more. But I'm not sure. It'd be kind of fascinating to see if there were previous Garu nations. I mean, that would be a massive homebrew edition. And I don't think I don't think White Wolf has done previous histories of other Garu nations. That'd be fascinating for anyone in the chat to drop into Discord if they did.
I see no reason why that Central Asian steppe nomad should not have a dreamcatcher. After all, the dreamcatcher was originally an Ojibwe thing, but it caught on so much that you have some variation of it in most North American indigenous cultures. I have one. It's right there. I don't know if it's in the frame. I don't want to take it off. It's a bit fragile. A few people have actually criticized me for owning this. I've had this since I was a baby.
Oh, the dreamcatcher. Oh, I thought he meant the symbol of the flying snake.
Seriously, I can't remember a time when I didn't have this. It was a gift from my mother, and I've always had a genuine engagement with it. It's always been a part of my life, and it's a symbol to me that I find meaning in. My point being, you can run these tribes with their original cultural aesthetics so long as you don't force it upon all its members, and understand the different cultures and individuals around the world who are part of this organization, certainly, they're still going to dress their own way too. And I further believe that sometimes these political affiliations with the tribes may not be primarily philosophical, but may be actually tied to a place and a particular culture. That particular tribe's interpretation of their culture may be extremely idiosyncratic and diverge from what most of the members of that culture believe.
So he's describing the exact same thing in werewolf culture as he described in the technocracy, where overlapping fields of reality for the technocracy were still different because they tried to make everything standardized, except they failed. And every little branch of the technocracy was actually not always the same. And you can go into one random town on the other side of the world, and they were part of the technocracy, and they ran this area, and they are also doing things that are completely what they would consider part of the traditions, except maybe it wasn't because they're still part of the technocracy, but they're not, because location matters, place matters, people matter. And that is what he's describing here. It's just funny how the same thing of people are people, so there's still the divisions between them, is a major force here. And it sounds like I initially moved into this entire concept of the breaking of the tribes as probably done so that they could make it so that you can move between tribes as a choice as opposed to a birth. But it sounds like what they've done now is that is what they're trying to make it. But the reason they're making the change is kinda because they just don't want to deal with it. I wonder how that really works out, though.
But that's valid, because they're not humans. They're werewolves. They have a very different lived experience. So if you want to have the Wendigo tribe as part of your chronicle, I think you absolutely still can, especially...
I heard about those tribes that were more like NPC tribes, but were they previous players before? Oh. The only thing I'm disagreeing with him here is they're werewolves, not people. Honestly, the way he's describing it is the exact same thing as people. People are people, and that means good and bad, fucked up and awesome in equal measures, and you'll find out which one when it bites you in the face. And for werewolves, that might be a literal thing.
Especially if you run it as a faction within a given tribe. The tribes and what they represent have changed canonically over the millennia. There's been splits, new tribes have formed, old tribes have died out. Culture is not neat. It's disorderly. Also, they can't unprint previous editions of Werewolf, so I will still be talking about some of those no longer canonical tribes and try to give a general idea of the old lore, as well as how to implement some of the old lore into this new werewolf paradigm.
And this is where I'm going to cut this one because I want to check out other things. And honestly, I could probably do this entire batch right now, but I want to save going into the actual individual tribes and how they're implemented into the next one. Mostly because I know if I do more, I would watch this entire damn thing because it sounds so freaking cool. Also because I'm being distracted by everyone in chat talking about how mummies are awesome and like, I want to read this, but I also can't because we're doing this right now. Also, mummies do sound awesome. But just, I love how he's getting into this, breaking down the reasoning of it. And the more I'm finding out about it, the more werewolf, not even werewolf, white wolf in general, are presenting very down-to-earth, based on reality settings that even though they're fantasy and are crazy in what they do and are completely beyond reaction, they're also just very much influenced based on and inspired by real world aspects that you don't really see in many other games. The only other one that I can think of that comes up like this, that uses a lot of reality in its everything, is Battletech. Because that's based on all of these problems, all of these solutions are brought forward into what are, sometimes when they're written right, realistic situations. So it's an aesthetic of realism in the extreme fantasy or realism in the extreme sci-fi that is great, but also means that when it breaks down, when they switch something, like this entire video about the breakdown of tribes is not nearly ideal because you can see the difference between the high thought and then the knee-jerk reaction, which it may or may not have been the entire thing of. I don't know. I wish I knew more about how it was initially implemented, how it was done. Was it fully fleshed out initially, or was it just the add-on that they added to over time till it wasn't horrible, and then they decided to take out because initially it was just for their bad reasons? I don't know! That's what it's like getting into something this late into its lifespan. There's so much context I'm not aware of because I wasn't there for it. It's fascinating, but so frustrating because I don't know yet. Either way, you guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. Burgerkrieg's awesome. This video is fascinating. I love his commentary because it's so freaking on the nose, man. I love it. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.